Hey guys, it's Dani. Today we are talking about reed stem Epidendrum orchids. I didn't feature these orchids a lot on my channel because I didn't have too many of them, but for the past year I do have more experience with these guys. I have a few. I also have my oldest one that I'm gonna show you. So today, since I have one of them in full bloom and isn't he glorious, I decided to make an ID and also care tips type of video because these orchids are really rewarding and worth it, and you can grow these guys both in a home and also in your garden. Let's first start with my epidendrum that bloomed, talk a little bit about him, and then let's get to the care tips. So first of all, the reed stem epidendrums derive pretty much all of them from the Epidendrum radicans, which is the original species. I don't have the pure radicans, I do have some of the hybrids, and this one is called Epidendrum Sister My Love. And it keeps many of the radicans characteristics, but we've improved a little bit the color palette. There are so many colors of these orchids, it's unbelievable. You can have reds, magentas, pinks as this one, yellows, oh I'm dying to have the yellow one, orange, and all sorts of variations, all sorts of color combos as well. You can have a very fiery yellow-orange lip on a purple-red background. Anyway, it's a lovely color palette. The Epidendrum Sister My Love is actually one of the most common hybrids, and as we can see, it has a really nice 3D-ish type of bloom cluster, displaying tiny little flowers, numerous, I didn't even count them, they might be 20 in there, forming pretty much a bowl. It's really cute. And it just makes for such a wonderful and unique display. We can see that the lip is pointing upwards and it just gives the impression of a bird. Either I like birds a lot, either I do believe it looks like a bird. Whatever the case might be, the display is really gorgeous. Does not look like an orchid, does it? Well, it is. The Sister My Love has a beautiful, I would say pretty mild or pale pink. It's not very pale, but it's definitely not a very saturated color. There is little variation or patterning, while the lip is a very pale pink, almost white in color. As far as color combos are concerned, maybe this one is not the most spectacular one, but it is really elegant, I would say. Just look at this inflorescence. Now, let me show you something very cool about this orchid. As you can see, the flowers are pretty much displayed all around in a bowl. But if you look in the center, you can see some more buds forming. Now, at some point, these flowers will just drop, they will become spent, but more buds and more blooms are just waiting in there to start yet another flush of blooms. How cool is that? Pretty much an inflorescence can hold maybe 30 flowers, and it will always have this tendency to form this bowl or roundish shape. You will not see all of the blooms just facing one side, facing the light. They might have a bias, but all of them will try to be pretty much symmetrical in this inflorescence. I find it to be very interesting. Now, the plant itself looks pretty much like a dendrobium, I would say. Although for those of us who are very acquainted with dendrobiums and epidendrums, it doesn't really look like one. But hey, it has the same structure. It is a sympodial orchid, it has canes, and it has leaves on each side. The efflorescences come from the top of the new growths. We call this a terminal spike, but each cane can actually rebloom. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes you can have keikis from these guys on this flower spike, because as you can see, this is not necessarily a flower spike, it is a continuation of the cane, of the stem actually. So along this cane or stem, we still have growth nodes. So from these growth nodes, we can have keikis, or in some cases, not all the times, further inflorescences. And this is a trait that actually makes these orchids become slightly unruly. As you can see, they are pretty big, pretty much all of them except that one, but we'll talk about it. And if you can imagine, they can create keikis from the top. And by the way, this is a place where I removed a keiki. You can imagine they can get really tall and unruly. Already one of these, and they're not fully mature, is about 50 centimeters high, 60 centimeters I might add for that one. They can grow taller than this, and the radican species, I think, is even taller. So if you can imagine, they can create further keikis that will be as tall as the mother plant. You can see how it can become a little unruly. Now the Epidendrum Sister My Love, as well as the other hybrids of the radicans, as far as I know, they're not fragrant. They are not known to be fragrant, so people don't purchase them for the fragrance aspect, but for the display and the colors and the ease of growth, actually. Because this hybrid, as well as all of the others, are really easy to grow. The radicans is actually native to Mexico, Puerto Rico, and I also see many of you guys who live in the south of the USA growing these orchids outside. Now, if you are native from that area, you might actually have these orchids maybe in your backyard, or maybe you've seen them. You kind of know what they like and what climate they prefer, right? But for the rest of us, I'm gonna go through the basic care tips for these guys as far as my experience tells me and as far as I've observed. Now, my first Epidendrum reed stem epidendrum, that is this one. This is an Epidendrum Crystal Valley Red Star. Yes, he's very tiny, but he's supposed to be this way. It is a hybrid created specifically to be compact and not as tall and unruly. I did have him in bloom. He's a wonderful guy. Problem is, I do feel like this type of hybrid, either it's more finicky than the other more natural, if I can call them like that, hybrids. Either mine had fusarium and I just had to deal with it. This is a keiki from the original plant that I had, and you can see how tiny it is, but at maturity, it doesn't grow more than 30 centimeters tall. Compared to the radican, it's pretty tiny. So this is the only orchid that I found to be slightly finicky, and the keiki is actually not as finicky as the mother plant. Other than that, the other epidendrums that I have, they're a joy to grow and look after. They never gave me headaches. So as you know, I grow my orchids in a grow room. I don't grow them outside, even though my climate is subtropical. I have a funny suspicion it's a little cooler than the south of the USA. In wintertime here, I can have winds which freeze a little bit the water. It doesn't happen every year, but I just don't want to risk it, so I did not keep these orchids outside. So I cannot really say about extremes. But from the extremes they've experienced in my grow room, I can tell you they're extremely tolerant. In the summertime, they pose no issues in my hot temperatures. In the daytime, let's say 30 degrees Celsius is absolutely no problem. In the wintertime, I had 15 degrees Celsius in my greenhouse as well, or actually grow room, it's not a greenhouse. And again, they had no issue with this. So overall, I would say intermediate conditions, maybe slightly to the warmer side, would do great for them. And as it just so happens, these are the conditions you usually find in a home. What about humidity? That's the problem we experience in our homes, right? We have low humidity. They don't seem to mind that either. And considering where they come from and the elevation, it's no surprise they actually don't require high amounts of humidity. It's more important to maintain them hydrated through watering than to boost humidity. Overall, all orchids like higher humidity, but don't imagine you need to provide 80% humidity. It's not that type of orchid, it's not a Miltoniopsis. So from the point of view of humidity, yet again, I wouldn't bother too much. If you have 40–50% humidity, that's perfect. If you have 30, make sure you just water it in time and just see how your particular plant does. Now here come the crucial parts of its care. These guys are highlight orchids, very highlight. I've seen people keeping them in full direct sunshine, maybe in the heat of the summer a little sheltered, but most of the times people keep them in direct sunshine, and that seems to work perfectly for them. I keep them in my grow room in Vandalite, so up against my southern window. Reason why they look a little deformed, they try to grow towards the light. But in front of them there is my southern window. They receive the most amount of light, just like the Vandas. And they seem to be doing great. Some reed stems will start to gain this reddish hint. That's okay, it means it receives high light, but some of them will not. Maybe it depends on the hybrid and on the color. That one is supposed to be an orange epidendrum, so we'll see what happens. This one, as you can see, is pink, it has purple, and the one below, as you can see, we have red tinges as well. It's a purple one, purple-red, so maybe that says something about the levels of anthocyanin. This guy is orange, yellow, orange, at least it should be. And as you can see, we don't have such a great red tinge to it, maybe a little bit, and they all sit in the same spot. So light is crucial. I've never kept these guys in Phalaenopsis light or low light, so I cannot tell you how they will behave. Probably they won't die, but most probably flowering will be affected, just like other orchids which are high light. So if you have one of these orchids and it never bloomed for you, although it's mature, maybe consider the light. It's usually the main aspect of their care you need to pay attention to. But there's a second one, maybe not so important, and this is watering. If we look a little bit on the orchid species website, we can see it described as terrestrial and litophyte, depending on the area. And overall, I do feel like my particular orchids do require a lot of water compared to other orchids. However, I want to elaborate a little bit on the terrestrial aspect. Many plants are terrestrial, but the soil mixture in which they grow is very different. Some plants do very well in heavy clay soils while others don't. When it comes to this particular orchid, the fact that it's terrestrial doesn't really mean we can pluck it in heavy, very suffocating soil, very rich soil, and it will do great. No, actually, even if it's a terrestrial, we still need to maintain the root system aerated and ventilated. This is one of those orchids that I consider at the edge. There is a very fine line between litophyte, epiphyte, terrestrial when it comes to orchids. Life on a rock and life on a tree is pretty similar, although there are differences. Both of the orchids though can grow roots in the air, and as you can see on mine, I do have aerial roots. But it can also be treated as a terrestrial if we provide very loose and very aerated soil, nothing that can compact and suffocate it, because it will not do great in that, even though it is a terrestrial. So with experience, this will actually come innate. But right now, even if you read that an orchid is terrestrial, just look at the orchid. Does it have aerial roots? If yes, then it can very well grow in air pockets, as long as you provide moisture. If you're dealing with Paphiopedilums or Phragmipediums, you might have noticed they don't have aerial roots. They cannot withstand the same amount of airiness as this type of orchid. So with your medium, you can go to one side or the other. You can pot them in bark, but make sure that you do water them in time. They're water hogs in their growing season. If your climate is cool or very humid, maybe bark is the best solution for you. If your climate is kind of dry or warm and you don't really have time to water all that much, maybe consider something more water retentive, maybe even a terrestrial orchid mix. Do provide bark chips or perlite or something to aerate it. If you have a little cocoa peat or even normal peat, you can add that as well, but just make sure that everything is ventilated and aerated. Don't go to one of the extreme or the others. As for myself, I'm growing them in semi-hydroponics. They grow great. They rooted themselves like crazy in the system. They have air, they have moisture. They do pretty much great for me in semi-hydroponics, and that's how I intend to grow them, because I have no headaches with watering. Even though my system or my pot is not dry yet, I can water, I can flush, I can do whatever, and nothing will get suffocated. So for me, it's kind of easy. I don't have a watering schedule, but I will tell you this, in the growing season, I do tend to water more because they're growing and they consume. In the winter, not as much. Some people suggest that you take a break with them. I suggest that you watch the orchid, because there is such a thing as not watering enough, even in the winter time. If your environment gets cooler or more humid or water evaporates slower, do decrease watering. They will take a little, maybe I shouldn't say break, but they will stop growing vegetatively and start preparing the flowers. They will not require as much water, so do try to pipe down a little bit on watering, but I don't suggest you completely cut it. Just watch your orchid. If you see it shriveling, do give it some water. Overall, the reed stem epidendrum is a joy to grow, in my opinion. If you don't have the climate for it, you can very well grow it in a house. If you do, you might consider growing it in the garden, or at least in the warm months, consider growing it in the garden. Regarding pests, I didn't observe it to have any, let's say, soft spots, but of course, spider mites will attack it. Mealybugs will attack it, as well as scale. It's not necessarily a magnet for something in particular, but pests will appreciate it. Other than that though, just plan ahead for the space it will take up and try to shape it or stake it. As you can see, I didn't do a very good job at it, but at least it's interesting, right? It's a tall orchid, and it can become slightly bushy. It can propagate through keikis from the top. It's a little unruly, and it requires you to be a little careful with managing it. Other than that, I just think it's a joy. Alrighty guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it and you learned something new, and you know the drill. If you did enjoy it, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!